This meeting of the Registered Sanitarian Advisory Committee to order. I'll do a roll call of members. Dalton Knight.
Here.
Sean May.
Present.
Stephen Costados.
Present.
Sorry. Lisa Pomeroy.
Present.
Terry Ricks.
Yo.
Jim Dingman. I'm here, I think. We have 3 vacancies still on the committee. We have a vacancy for a consumer to be on the committee, as well as a industry member and a professional engineer. So if anyone on the committee or at TDLR has some ideas who might be able to fill those vacancies, please let us know, and we'll be happy to look into it. We would certainly like to have a full committee available.
Question. The industry, like, is there any particular kind of, I mean, you're talking about food industry in general, or it could be
It
related?
says, consumer member of an industry or occupation which is regulated either by a city or county environmental health unit or department or equivalent, or by the Texas Department of State Health Services.
So, water systems, like sanitary water systems would count.
Yes.
I'll have to talk to Monty, because
Chairman Dingman, and just as you are giving us that information, and we will definitely make sure, Mary Winston, TDLR, that posting is, if not still out there, reposted. And if we can think of some ideas internally, we would also try to get that word out. Also, make sure that once we're speaking, because we do have people, it's being recorded for YouTube, I almost said Google, YouTube. And we want to make sure we speak in the microphone so everyone can hear us. We can hear in the room, but they won't be able to hear on camera, and introduce ourselves before we add to the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Yes, I need to mention, failed to mention, that if, as we progress in today, if you have a motion to be made or a second, or wish to add information on a discussion to a motion, please identify yourself before you speak. It helps with record keeping. Okay, we certainly have a quorum ready, so let's take the minutes from our December 5th, 2017 meeting, and I will entertain a motion on those minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Terry Ricks, I move to approve the minutes as printed.
Mr. Chairman, Sean May, I second the motion.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Okay, motion carries. All right, we have the next agenda item is a public comment period. Any person wishing to address the committee may please approach the bench over here and identify yourself and the information you'd like to provide. Is there anyone that has a public comment? All right, hearing none, we'll move to staff reports. Licensing division.
Good morning, Chairman and board members. I'm Lisa Hodak, Licensing Manager. And I have presented to you the second quarter numbers for the professional sanitarians and sanitarian in training. I feel like I'm talking loud. So we have issued 23 new registrations for the professional sanitarians. Our population for renewals online is at 81%, and our total population is 1259. In the sanitarian and training, we issued 16 new registrations. Renewals online are 100%. Of course, there's only one, but and the total population is 75. This gives us a combined total of 1334, and that's from November to February. That's pretty much it. My report's brief today, but I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Anyone have questions for Lisa? All right,
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to Consumer Services Division. Customer Services, I'm sorry.
All right. Good morning, Chairman and board members. My name is Trey Seals, and I'm the Director of our Customer Service Division. And I'm here to do a brief introduction of the Customer Service Division, and just will also note in the future, the manager responsible for this program in my area will be Twan Nguyen, so he may be presenting on the behalf of customer service in future meetings. So a little bit about us. We are 51.5 or 52 hardworking individuals in our area. We answer for the agency the phone calls, emails, social media posts. We also assist with walk-ins at our downtown location. To tell you a little bit about numbers, with those 52 people, we take approximately, or we receive approximately 2,000 calls per day and 400 emails per day. In the last fiscal year, we had 500,000 contacts. So it's a very, very busy division. We do a lot of interactions and interfacing with the public, with licensees, with consumers who have questions about how to get licensed, how to renew a license, what is, in this case, for this industry, we're seeing questions about what kinds of degrees, coming up to graduation. We're noticing, several things, and it's pretty new for us still, but we are learning a lot as we work with your industry. So we have currently 5 languages that we do answer calls in, so English, Spanish, Vietnamese, we do have a Korean speaker, and Mandarin. A little bit about myself. I am new to this role. It'll be 2 years in, I believe, August, but have been with the division for 13 years and with the agency for 13 years as well. So I have seen the growth and the expansion of the services to the public, to the licensee base, and it's been a great experience here at the agency. So a little bit about statistics. For this particular industry, like I said, we are noticing, typically with the holidays, the calls and emails do drop a little bit, but as we get towards summer and towards graduation, we're noticing an increase in those contacts. They primarily call via our 800 number or our local number, but there's also a pretty good chunk of email in there as well. So just wanted to give you a brief introduction. That is all I have for this morning, but I'm open to answering any questions if you have them.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trey. All right, next is the Enforcement Division.
Good morning. I'm Dawn Burton. I'm a prosecutor in the Enforcement Division, and I'm presenting today's staff report. Last month, the Enforcement Work Group met to discuss the criminal conviction guidelines. That item will be discussed, item F, later this morning. Today's staff report does not have any case highlights or statistics because as of today, we haven't resolved any enforcement cases in this program. It may be that because the Sanitarians enforce standards, we may not see as many enforcement cases as we see in other programs. But if we have any orders in the future, we will present case highlights and statistics in our staff report. Do you have any questions about the staff report? And I'm available for any questions you may have.
Questions? If not, thank you, Don. Appreciate it. Okay, next report is the Education and Examination Division report.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. My name is Angie Schmidt, and I am one of the team leads in Education and Examination. I'm passing out the new statistic form. It's just updated from the one you have in your packet. As you know, we received this program from DSHS in November 2017. When the program came over, we began using the examination they already had, and it needs to be updated. We are working on that. Since January 2018, we have been seeking applications for subject matter experts to update this exam. And we plan to meet sometime this fall. And I'm going to throw your words back to you. If you're aware of anyone that may qualify or wants to be a part of this, please have them submit an application. Are there any questions, or can I answer anything? Yes, sir.
Yes, Sean May, I have a question. Are you aware of, I mean, from my understanding, a lot of the testing is done online through, I believe it's Pearson Testing Centers. Anyway, are you aware, and I know that, again, I have to preface this, I understand that the program has come from Department of State Health Services, but are you aware if those question banks have been evaluated, the types of questions that are being asked over the past couple of years? Do those questions, I'd like to learn more about, do those questions change? I know maybe the order in which they're presented to the test taker may alter, but the questions themselves, the topics that they've been on, that kind of thing, I'm interested to learn more.
Ray Pizarro, Director for the Education Examination Division. First, the exams are currently being administered at PSI. You're correct, they were at Pearson VUE with the SHS. When we received the items, we collected all of the items, and Pearson VUE transferred all of those items intact as they were being delivered with them to us. The question was asked to Pearson VUE, have these items has ever been reviewed or vetted, if you will? And the answer is no. So to answer your question, they are what they are since we got them.
Right.
And as Angie was saying, we're going to bring in those folks at the table with the psychometricians to go over all of the items to see, do we need these items? Are they relevant? Do we need new ones? Do we need to change them? Do we need to delete them? That kind of thing. So we'll get there slowly but surely, but we want to make sure we have the right items, we are asking the right questions so that we make the right assessment, so we're not licensing sanitarians that should not be licensed.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I commend you guys for taking on that, and I think that's really an important initiative that you're doing. And I understand these things take time and the history of them, but I'd like to commend you guys for getting that process started almost right away and taking the time, put the right group of people together to get after that. I really do appreciate that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Terry.
Terry Ricks, how would a person that would, well, I have someone in mind that I would like to suggest to them to apply to be on this revisal committee. Where would they go? Is there a website?
Angie Schmidt, E&E, they can go onto our website, and there is an application online.
Okay, no, which website?
The tdlr.texas.gov.
TDLR.
Mr. Riggs, Carla James, TDLR.
That's TX? That's .tx.gov?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Spelled out.
Spell out Texas.
We'll have that
Huh?
link
Oh,
sent to
spell
you.
out Texas, okay.
Yes.
We'll have the link sent
Oh,
to the
okay.
board.
All right, that'd be
We'll take care of that.
fine.
And one more
Yeah.
question: how many more people do you need for that committee that you're putting together? Do you have any kind of rough idea are you almost full? Do you need people?
Let me just say, we like to have, there's not a magical number, if you will, but we like to have a good sampling around the state. In other words, we don't need all the sanitarians from El Paso. Okay? So we like to have, if we can, we like to have a good sampling. We have some folks from Houston, Dallas, Austin, that kind of thing throughout the state. So, and again, we don't want 40 people in there because then we're not going to get anything done. So we do want just a nice, good number. It could be 7, 8, 5. We've had up to 10. So we're just trying to get that where we're comfortable, have the knowledge, the right folks, so that we can make that assessment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have actually done that kind of work on a committee back when we first started the food manager certification program. And Ione Winslow back then got a bunch of us together, and I was on one of her committees to help develop tests for the state test. So I know what you're doing, okay? And that's why I said I have somebody in mind that I think would
Perfect.
be a good person for you.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes, Lisa.
Lisa Pomeroy. I also wanted to remind you, and you probably already know this, but some sanitarians specialize in one section, such as food. Others might specialize in OSSF, so I'm sure you're looking at what the specialties are so you can get that across the board also.
That is correct.
Any additional questions? All right, thank you, Angie. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
All right, the next program report is the regulatory program management.
Good morning. I'm Katie Bryce with the Regulatory Program Management Division. I wanted to give you a quick update on this program. TDLR is conducting a web content initiative currently, reviewing all the different program websites, updating them to make them easier to navigate, easier to find what you need. So I plan on reviewing this registered sanitarian program pages in the near future. We continue to assist customer service and licensing division with transcript reviews, military experience reviews for applications. And last month, I gave a presentation on this program to our customer service and licensing division just as a refresher and to answer any questions that they have that they're getting phone calls on and that type of thing. For public outreach, I attended, along with Stuart Myrick, another person in regulatory program management, the Texas On-Site Wastewater Association Conference in Waco, and that was actually a lot of fun. I have to say that the vendor displays were much more exciting than at some of the other conferences I attend. And we had a lot of people actually come and visit our booth, and so that was nice. Also in December, right after your last meeting, David Gonzalez and I presented at the South Texas Environmental Health Association Conference in South Padre. We gave a presentation covering both code enforcement officers and registered sanitarians. For our section update, we are staying focused on maintaining the successful operation of the 13 programs that transferred over from Department of State Health Services. We are issuing a newsletter now called the Health Monitor. You can find a link to it from the website. The new edition, I believe, will be coming out late May or early June. And other than that, I think that pretty much covers my report. Do you all have any questions for me?
Just a comment. I hope that you all are looking at doing an exhibit at the Texas Environmental Health Association in October, literally almost just across the street at the Clarion, I think it is.
Oh,
Crown Plaza.
Crown Plaza.
Crown
Plaza.
Crown Plaza.
We were there last year, and we're hoping to be there again this year.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Stephen Consados. Will that newsletter be emailed to all the members, or is that something that's going to be internal?
I believe that it's available on the website, and I think it's also sent out in an email update if you've signed up to receive email updates. I believe that's correct.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Katie. Okay. The next report is Executive Office Report.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, board members, Nick Voinis, TDLR Chief of Staff. Thanks for being here today. Appreciate your service to state. And here to kind of bring you a little snapshot of what's happening around the agency. We received some good news recently when Governor Abbott announced his appointment of 2 new commissioners to our board with for terms that expire in 2023. The board's back at full strength. He added Dr. Ray Callis, who is a physician anesthesiologist from Beaumont, and Dr. Gary Wesson, a retired orthodontist living in Bastrop, to our 7-member commission. We've got additional biographical information on our website, and the commission next meets in a couple of weeks on Thursday, May 24th. As an agency, we're in the process of completing our strategic planning exercise, and it's something that the legislature mandates all state agencies do every 2 years, and it's something that we take very seriously. 2 years ago, we identified 56 strategic initiatives to address during last year's legislative session, and 52 of them were passed and signed into law. I want to stress that all our constituents had a voice in the process. We reached out to licensees, consumers, advisory board members, industry reps, and so on. and all of them are encouraged to participate. We hosted external sessions with the public in Arlington, El Paso, Houston, McAllen, and Austin. And for those members of the public who were unable to make a session in person, we posted survey questions on our Facebook page and on our website and encouraged folks to participate that way. These sessions were an opportunity for everybody to share ideas and opinions on how we're doing and how we can improve. We also conducted internal sessions with our staffs throughout the agency in March and April, and we're in the process of compiling ideas and drafting the final report, and it will be made public in early June. As far as public outreach, I'd like to talk to you about our website for a minute, tdlr.texas.gov, and update you on some traffic numbers associated with the program. Over the past 6 months, the Registered Sanitarians website had 17,861 page views, or an average of 99 per day. Of the people that accessed your site, 65% did so from a desktop, while 30% did so from a smartphone, and another 5% from a tablet. The top reasons for visiting the site, number one, forms and applications, followed by online licensing, exam information, frequently asked questions, and continuing education information. Also want to remind you of our social media presence on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with TDLR events and news. And also want to remind you, we have a group of about 4,000 subscribers who receive various email blasts pertaining to your program, including newsletters, like Katie mentioned before. And if anyone is not receiving those and would like to, simply go to tdlr.texas.gov and you can subscribe to it. If any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
All right. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is a discussion and potential action on approving the criminal conviction guidelines.
I can get water while we're waiting on the weed eater to quit. When Carla speaks, weed eater operators listen. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, board members. My name is Ken Sharp. I'm an attorney here with the Enforcement Division at TDLR. Just a little about me, I'll tell you that I've been practicing law for over 25 years. Before that, I was a police officer for another 12 years. So I have a pretty close understanding and relationship with people who've been involved in criminal activity. I listened to Dawn's report a little while ago, and I actually saw the paper too, and it shows that the registered sanitarians now have 0 cases pending, 0 complaints pending, 0 fines unpaid, all of that kind of stuff, 0 revocations, 0 denials. I like you folks, and I think we'll get along okay, but you know, we just don't have a lot in common, because I deal with the criminal history aspect of this operation.
We're a bunch of dirty, rotten rule followers.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Well, I'm used to excitement, you know, criminal activity, all this kind of stuff that gets your blood pumping, and you know, I probably won't be down here with you very much for that reason. So that's good, though. We are going to talk about the criminal conviction guidelines today. We have to have these guidelines under the law. That it requires that we have them, even though you're probably never going to abuse them. Maybe 1 or 2 rogues will filter in there somewhere or another, but Carla will take care of them just as she takes care of weed eaters. We had a work group that met, I'll do this.
There you go.
We had a work group that met on April 24th. It consisted of a number of you folks from the advisory board, and we certainly appreciate that. But it was a very productive session. It was very informative for us. We learned a lot about it, and we were able to formulate this draft of the criminal conviction guidelines that you have in your materials there. Before we get into it, we want to give you a little bit of background about these things and about some of the stuff that we do. Stuff is a technical word. It's a legal term. We're going to talk about the origin of criminal conviction guidelines. We're going to talk about why we have them and what benefits they provide, not only to TDLR and not only to the profession or the occupation, but also to the general public and
it's especially important to license applicants and those people who are already registered who may have been involved in some criminal activity, and they may be facing some kind of sanction. So this will help them understand this a little bit. I'm also going to explain how these particular guidelines, how we would develop those, and then we'll talk about the proposed guidelines and talk about any questions or concerns that you have. Hopefully they were all addressed at the work group meeting, but if there's anything else that comes up, I will sure address it today. Afterwards, we're going to ask the board to vote to recommend to the commission to adopt these criminal conviction guidelines. Well, first let's talk briefly about why we have them in the first place, other than the fact that the legislature said you will have them. But the legislature also said that we're going to have these regulatory agencies, and these regulatory agencies are going to have several different purposes, but chief among them are consumer protection and public safety. Well, one way we try to help achieve those goals is to limit licensing to those people who can be honored to trust or trusted to honor those principles of public safety and consumer protection. People who will honor that trust that's being placed in them by being licensed or registered in this case. So we're especially wary of people who have a criminal history because, well, for obvious reasons. We screen each applicant very carefully for criminal convictions that should compel us to deny an application, or to, if it's a case of a renewal, we talk about revoking the registration of somebody who already has one. But the question comes up, well, how do we know which convictions we should consider? Because not all of them should probably be considered as a basis for the denial of an application or the revocation of an existing registration. Consider, if you will, we also regulate cosmetology. Hairstylists, estheticians, you know, the makeup and all that kind of stuff that I don't have any idea about, obviously. But consider for a minute illegal oyster harvesting. If you have someone who's been convicted of illegal oyster harvesting, and that person applies for a cosmetology license, are you going to be able to put those two together and say, oh, wait a minute, you're out there grabbing clams when you shouldn't. We're not going to give you a cosmetology license. No, doesn't have anything to do with a license. So we don't look at that. We're very careful about that. We make these distinctions between criminal convictions that are related and things that don't have anything to do with it and aren't going to affect the occupation or the work in that occupation at all. The legislature recognized that also, and of course, as I said before, they directed each licensing agency, not just TDLR, but each licensing agency to prepare these guidelines, to issue them and to say, well, what crimes are directly related to an occupation that you're giving this license for, or in this case, a registration, and why? What are the reasons for it? So we have those two things that we have to do, and it's legislatively mandated, and of course, as you can see, it's kind of helpful for a variety of reasons. But the criminal conviction guidelines, very simply, it's a list of crimes or criminal convictions that may affect a person's eligibility for an occupational license or registration, and why it would have such an effect. In other words, why a certain crime is directly related to the occupation. Now, we often refer to these, and you may have heard it already, as guideline crimes. So if you hear me say that, that's what we're talking about, criminal conviction guidelines. Before we get going too far along on this, I'm going to tell you that there are also a number of other reasons for denying or revoking a registration. We get some pretty basic but some pretty comprehensive guidance from Chapter 53 of the Texas Occupations Code. Excuse me. There are four main parts of this one particular statute, and I'll give you the number if you want, but math sometimes confuses me. But there are four different parts of this. I'm going to go through the 2, 3, and 4 first, and then we'll come back to the first one. The second one in that list that authorizes us to deny an application or to revoke an existing license or registration is if a crime was committed, even if it's not directly related, but if it was committed within 5 years of the date of the application, we can look back at that and use that as a basis, if it's appropriate, as a basis for denial or revocation. The third part, or the third list, is it's a list of really, really bad stuff. It comes from a provision in the Code of Criminal Procedure that limits the abilities of judges to say, well, we're just going to give you probation on this one. This is really bad stuff. It's, for example, murder, indecency with a child, aggravated sexual assault, aggravated robbery, things like that, things that involve, or felonies that involve the use of a weapon and so forth. Very often, these are also guideline crimes. We look at these kind of things and we say, no, we don't want those people doing that. So we're going to have those in our list of guideline crimes. And that's okay. There's a lot of overlap in guideline crimes and in this third category, and also in the fourth category that I'm going to talk about, and that's the sexually violent offenses. This is also a provision in the Code of Criminal Procedure, is where this comes from. That's the part of the Code of Criminal Procedure. It says you're going to have sex offender registration under some of these guidelines, or some of these crimes, rather. These are things like indecency with a child, sexual performance by a child, compelling sexual performance by a child, aggravated sexual assault, and so forth. And as you can see, there's some overlap between those in the previous category. They're particularly bad crimes, but they have a sexual element to them, and that's what makes them the sexually violent crimes. Now, those three provide an independent basis, as I said before, for a denial or revocation, even if they're not in the guidelines that we're going to talk about today. They're broad, they're general, and they apply to a lot of different people, including TDLR. Okay, but now let's go back to the first reason in that list of 4 that I told you about in the statute. The department is authorized to revoke a license or a registration or to deny an application for one if the person has been convicted of or even placed on deferred adjudication for a criminal offense that is directly related to the occupation. And that sounds kind of familiar because that's what we're here for, the criminal conviction guidelines, those things that are directly related to the occupation. But let me talk about this for a minute. These are the things that, as I said before, they affect or may affect a person's eligibility for a license. When we have the guidelines, it's a broad, general thing. It says, hey, if you've got these kind of criminal convictions, you may not be eligible for a license, so look at them and see what you think. When we go over to this particular statute, number 1 in this statute, it says, okay, they talked about directly related in the guidelines, we're going to talk about directly related in your case. So, for example, if we have somebody who applies for a registration and we say, no, we're going to deny you because you've got a conviction for a directly related offense. We know that from our guidelines. We look at some other things too. We'll talk about that in a minute. But say the person says, well, I don't like that. I want a hearing. I want to contest this. And they do. They can get a hearing, and we'll go up to the State Office of Administrative Hearings. The administrative law judge will listen to all of the evidence, and the administrative law judge will put this number 1 to work on a specific basis, that person's case specifically. So it becomes, in a sense, it's general, but it's also specific on a case-by-case basis, which it has to be. All right. I guess to summarize, so we have the crimes that are directly related to an occupation. We have those that are committed within 5 years prior to the date of an application for a license or registration. We have those really bad crimes, the heinous stuff like murder and aggravated assault. And we have the sexually violent offenses, the aggravated assault or sexual assault of a child and so forth. Any questions on any of these things so far? Before we get into the specifics of the proposed guidelines, I want to talk to you for a few minutes about our process here, the mechanics of what we do at TDLR when we look at these kind of things. We carefully screen, as I said before, each applicant for criminal convictions, and we look for those convictions that are listed in the criminal conviction guidelines, because we have those. That's our starting point. We also look in Chapter 53 and see if anything there applies. And I don't know if I made this clear before, but if I didn't, I'll make it clear now. Chapter 53, that root authorization for us, it authorizes us, not requires, but authorizes us to deny a license or to revoke an existing license or registration. Nobody's perfect. People make mistakes. We understand that. They talk about how good judgment comes from experience, and a lot of experience comes from bad judgment. And people learn from their mistakes, hopefully. And, okay, some of them don't. I admit I've been in this for a long time. But most people do. And we're not going to hold somebody back. Heck, I had a speeding ticket in 1995, but they still let me drive. They still let me keep my license. They don't want me to speed anymore, but I can still keep my license. It was a long time ago, and they say, okay, fine, we're going to let you do that. Well, that's kind of along the lines of some of the things that we consider when we're trying to determine whether we should apply the criminal conviction guidelines or Chapter 53 to deny a license application or revoke an existing license. How long ago was it that the offense was committed? What has the person done since then? Have they done good? Have they have a good criminal record and nothing happened since then? Or have they kept on committing crimes? How old were they at the time? You know, you got somebody who's 18 years old when they do something, and now they're 30 years old and trying to do something else, and there's no criminal activity in the meantime. Pretty safe bet they're probably not going to do that again. So we look at a lot of those things. Those are probably the most important things, and there's some other factors too, but that's what we look at. And you can put this to work in a practical context, if you will, for just a minute. Take a DWI. That's a pretty common offense in Texas. Well, a pretty common offense, unfortunately, across the United States. Driving while intoxicated. We regulate electricians. That really doesn't affect electricians. Electricians, I mean, yeah, they've got to get out there and drive to the job sites and things, but it really doesn't affect them on the job. What about a tow truck operator? Different story, because that person's out in a vehicle all the time. That's what they do. They operate a vehicle. So a DWI would be directly related to that occupation. Now, if it was last year, does that make it worse than if it was 10 years ago and nothing in between? So you can see kind of where our analysis goes on these kind of things. We have to think about all this stuff. There's no automatic disqualification. Let me give you another example. You have an air conditioning and refrigeration technician who is applying for a license, and he's now 30 years old, but back in college when he was 18, he shoplifted some beer. 12 years ago, nothing since then. Again, pretty safe bet. We're not going to have to worry about this guy. So even though there was a guideline offense that was committed, because theft is a guideline offense in air conditioning and refrigeration, as it is with most of our occupations, we're still probably going to approve that license. I think you can tell we do this on a case-by-case basis, because every case is different. Everybody's going to have a different background. They're going to be different ages when they commit these things, and they're going to do it over a different course of time. Let me talk about one more factor that we use in the overall analysis: honesty, trustworthiness, integrity. Okay, one more category of factors. I guess that's three. Honesty, trustworthiness, and integrity. We see this a lot on applications. People will fill out an application and say, no, I've never been convicted of anything, but then we run the criminal history check and we get a whole string of stuff. Or no, I've never been disciplined in any occupation, and we come to find out, oh yeah, you had your license as a plumber revoked 2 years ago. That's not very honest. They're not being honest with us. We have that particular standard in our statutes, in TDLR statutes, but it's also one in the government code that if they deliberately falsify an application, that's grounds to deny the thing. Even for renewals, that's grounds to reject that renewal and not give them the license anymore. We rarely ever have to use that alone. I say we rarely have to. We don't have to. Most of the time when somebody says, no, I've never been convicted of anything, but they have, it's enough to keep them out of the occupation, and that's why they say they haven't been convicted of anything, because they don't want us to find out. But we do, because we run a criminal background check on everybody who applies for a license or registration, even renewals. Well, that's our process. We look at the guidelines, we look at Chapter 53, we look at the honesty, integrity, and trustworthiness standard, and we consider those factors that I talked about a few minutes ago, and then we determine whether a person should be issued a license or should retain a license. We put all that stuff together, and then we make a decision. Well, hopefully that gives you an idea how we use these criminal conviction guidelines and all of the other law that applies when we determine whether a person's eligible for a license. Do you have any questions so far? Now, the guidelines, they're useful to TDLR, of course, in the way that I just talked about, but they're also useful to applicants. Person wants to apply for a license. Say, well, I wonder if I'm going to be eligible for this license. They can look on, well, theoretically, they can look at the Texas Register. I don't think I've ever met anybody who read the Texas Register to try to find out specific information like that. But TDLR has it on its public website. So if anybody wants to know if they're eligible for a license at TDLR, they can look on our website and they can see those criminal conviction guidelines, and they can see what they're up against or see whether they may be eligible. They can compare their own records. So if you've got somebody who just got out of prison for fraud and bribery and corruption, something like that, just got out of prison, and our proposed guidelines, by the way, thanks to the work group, we've got those elements in there. That we don't want those kind of people. You've said in that work group, we don't want those kind of people. We don't want crooked swindlers in our midst. So if that person just out of prison and has that kind of a record, that person's going to look on there and say, yeah, I'm probably not going to make it. Maybe I better go to the plumbing board. I should just take this, I just want to reiterate this because this is important. If that's something that happened 15 years ago and the person's been out of prison for 12 years and had a spotless record, model citizen ever since then, things might be different. We would look at that in a whole different light. So I just want to say that right now doesn't mean forever. It just means right now, and we'll see what happens in the future. And it's all going to be dependent on that person who applies. There is another way that these criminal conviction guidelines are helpful not only to TDLR but also to applicants. If they don't want to look into Texas Register, and who blames them, they can ask us, what do we think? Can you give me an advance determination on whether I'd be eligible for a license? They can pay a small fee, they can fill out an application, send us their criminal history information, and we'll look at it and we'll say, yeah, I think you would be eligible. Or, no, not a chance, pal. We don't use those words, by the way. It's an official letter that we send out to them. And it's not just TDLR. Every agency is required by law to go through that process and to provide that service to licensed applicants if they want it. We're not bound by our decision. 90% of the time, well, I say 90% of the time, I made that up because, as you know, 73% of all statistics are made up anyway. But the overwhelming majority of the time, whatever we say in those criminal history evaluation letters that we send out, it remains true when they apply and we look at the application and say, okay, yeah, we were right then and we're right now, and we give them the license or deny the license. We can change that. We're not bound by it. Let me say this because you take the example of a tow truck driver we talked about, the DWI a minute ago. The guy's got a spotless record. He applies for a tow truck license. He gets the license, or he gets the criminal history evaluation letter. It says, you are eligible to become a tow truck driver. And he goes out and celebrates. Comes home from the bar and gets that DWI that we talked about. We're not bound by that. Now that we've got new and different information, something else is going on, so we can kick that aside and we can proceed as we should. Okay, before we turn to the proposed guidelines, do you have any questions on any of this stuff so far? All right, and if you do, just jump in because otherwise I'll probably just keep you yapping. It was a pretty valuable experience for those of us in the enforcement division and TDLR here to be able to work with the work group, the members of the work group. We appreciate that. We learned a lot. We learned a lot about the context of some of the things that you do and the way you do some of your clients and the nature of contact you have with some of those clients. I have to commend the members of the work group for a very thoughtful and careful consideration of all of these things that we looked at and that we talked about. And you're going to see the results of their efforts in that in the proposed guidelines. So again, thank you very much for your hard work on this. When we started these guidelines, let me just give you a little background. We looked at some of the other things that we regulate, and we said, well, you know, these people are in people's homes. What kind of guidelines do we have for them? These people are in other people's businesses. What kind of guidelines do we have for them? These people are on the road a lot. What kind of guidelines do we have for them? So, you know, we looked at a lot of different things. Drug use, alcohol abuse, things that could affect a person's on-the-job performance. And we drafted these and of course, brought them to the work group. And I was really gratified by the discussion that we had. We also tried to think about other possible guidelines that might perhaps should be included, things that would be appropriate but weren't included, and maybe some things that we included that wouldn't be appropriate. But after all that was said and done, after we hashed all this out, this is what we ended up with. And I think you have those in your in materials. Let me draw your attention to one thing first. We don't deal with specific crimes. These are categories or types of crimes. You know, the phrase crimes involving bribery, corruption, so forth, theft, assault against people and things like that, crimes against the person. There are so many variations. You know, Texas has 254 counties, and each one of those counties has how many cities or municipalities in it. There are 50 states and, you know, all kinds of territories and things, and, you know, in foreign countries like the Washington, D.C. area. All of these places have different laws, and they call the same violation different things. So if we're in North Carolina, it might be statutory rape. In Texas, it might be aggravated assault of a child. So we don't want to avoid, or we want to avoid the possibility of missing any kind of offense that we should have caught. And by using these broad categories, we're far better off. We don't let things slip through the cracks like we would if we had to use specific names of crimes. All right, we can look at a few of these. Well, we actually probably look at all of them, I think is what you need to do. And I won't read them to you because I'm boring enough as it is. But we'll start with the crimes involving fraud, deceptive trade business practices, or abuse of office. And that third one came from the work group. It was a recommendation by one of you. And I apologize, I don't remember which one, but it was a good recommendation after we looked at it and we made this particular guideline. This is kind of, the foundation of this is kind of the honesty, integrity, and trustworthiness if you look at it. We don't want people in there who are going to swindle. We don't want them who are going to be corrupt and accept bribes or any kind of improper abuse of their capacity. And if you have any questions on any of these as we go, please stop me, because I'm going to kind of breeze through them all. I know you've probably already read them, and you'll have an opportunity to do that again. You probably won't ever have any use for them, but the next one is the bribery, forgery, tampering with government record, or perjury. And again, we're still in the honesty, integrity, and trustworthiness category. We don't want fraudulent people. We don't want any of our the people in this occupation gypping other people. Environmental law violations are affecting public health. Now, this kind of gets to the heart of what you do. And so you combine the honesty, integrity, trustworthiness, and the substance of your profession, and this is kind of what you come up with. Crimes against the person. If you get somebody who's angry and has a violent predisposition to resolving conflict, that's the last person you need out there working with others, working with the public and with the clients on a regular basis. We also added, thanks to the work group members, the negligent or reckless use of a motor vehicle, because you folks do use the motor vehicles quite a bit. And so that was a good one there to have. We don't want any of your folks to pose a risk to the public out on the roadways. And you got the violent stuff, and you got roadways. You know, you got the potential for road rage too. I hadn't thought about that till just now, but animal cruelty or neglect. Because you spend some time in those kind of contexts, then that is an important one to have, to make sure you don't have people who are mistreating livestock or other types of animals, breeders and so forth. Not the breeders themselves, but the animals that are subject to the breeding. The prohibited sexual conduct, public indecency, these are things that are in quite a few of our occupations, and I think for obvious reasons. You know, we don't want to have lewd people. We don't want to have people who impose themselves in improper manners on others, improper manner on other people. And of course, people with these types of proclivities, if you get into your occupation, they may have the opportunity to do that under some circumstances. We've seen it happen in other contexts. A society is only as good as the way it protects its most vulnerable citizens, the children, the elderly, the disabled, and so forth. And so we've got that in here, as we do with the majority of our occupations and criminal conviction guidelines. And then, of course, there are the crimes against property, such as theft, for example. You are probably going to be in contact with unsecured personal property in a number of the situations you're in your occupation. We don't want to have somebody with sticky fingers in there who can take advantage of that. The burglary is in there because when you have people who are going into buildings, not even homes, but buildings and other places, and they say, well, you know, I could get in here and get out there, and I could carry this away. That looks good. We don't want to give them that opportunity. So people with that kind of history, we would just rather they not be in this occupation. The next one is the crimes. This starts on the kind of the out of your mind stuff. delivery, possession, manufacturing, or use of controlled substances or other dangerous drugs. When you're mobile, out in your trucks and cars and things like that, you've got the opportunity to go pretty much anywhere unnoticed. Nobody's going to pay attention to you because you're out doing your job, you're doing your work. And as we talked about in the work group when somebody brought this one up, none of you want anybody in your midst who's peddling drugs. Don't want them using the drugs because it could affect their job performance. And it certainly reflects bad on the profession as a whole. Likewise, being impaired or intoxicated by use of alcohol, drugs, or dangerous substances. I mean, I guess that's kind of the same thing. I maybe jumped the gun and said that too early. So there you have the guidelines. Any questions on any of these? All right, well, thank you for your attention. I know it's hard to listen to me. At least that's what my wife says. But I appreciate your attention, and we would ask that you adopt a proposal for the commission to adopt these guidelines at their next commission meeting or at the next available opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
At this time, I'll entertain a motion regarding this particular criminal conviction guideline document.
Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we adopt these at our next meeting, if we can.
Do we have a motion? Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Sean and
Excuse me.
Stephen.
Thank you. Sorry.
All right, any discussion?
I was part of the work group. I'd just like to say, I thought it was really, really a great experience just again to hear from everybody on the thing with their different viewpoints. I thought there was a lot of time. I think we spent, you say, Lisa, we probably spent about 2 hours almost going over this. And just a lot of, it was really great being part of the work group because each one of us brought a different perspective and a different idea to it, and I thought it came out to be a really great product. So I just wanted to thank my fellow co-workers that were on that team. It's really a great product, I think.
Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. I will echo Sean's comments. It was a great opportunity to put this thing together and hopefully encompass all the different areas that we might have the possibility of keeping someone out of being a registered sanitarian based on criminal background and history. All right, item G, recommendations for agenda items for next committee meeting. Anyone have any? Stephen?
This is Stephen Katsados. I would like to propose an item for the next meeting for state reciprocity of the license, a state-by-state agreement, and I'm willing to be a part of a work group on that discussion.
Okay.
Excuse me, Chairman Doug Jennings, Assistant General Counsel. I would recommend work group reports from the 3 work groups that we've established. So enforcement, education and examination, and licensing. I would suggest those.
Great. Definitely have those.
Thank you, and possible recommendations, because I anticipate the work groups may have some ideas for future rulemaking at this next meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other items for next committee meeting? All right. Yeah,
I'm sorry,
Terry,
Chair.
go ahead.
The continuing educational group had submitted to us some suggested changes in the requirements for continuing education, and I would like to get with our work group and review it and then present it at the next meeting.
Okay. Yes, we'll have reports for both of the work groups,
Okay.
the licensing and the education and examination. All right, anything else? All right, hearing nothing, we'll move to the next item H, Discussion of date, time, and location for our next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, Nick Voinis, we will like to get back to you on those possible dates
Okay,
at this time. Thank you.
okay.
Do y'all have I'm sorry, Lisa Pomeroy, do y'all have a proposed time frame in between the meetings? Are you talking 3 months, or are you talking 6 months?
Doug,
or
do
do
you-
you know?
Doug Jennings, Assistant General Counsel. Right now, I think my anticipated timeline is somewhere near the end of the year, because I would like to have, we've got some good discussions going on in the work groups, and I definitely would like to meet again before the year expires, so we can get those work group reports and start figuring out how we're going to handle the rulemaking. One of the issues that could complicate that is we have a legislative session coming up, and sometimes we don't like, as an agency, to engage in rulemaking while we're also working on legislative matters. And so we'll kind of have to figure that out internally. But my personal thought is if we're not doing anything too complicated, we might be able to do those things simultaneously. But I do think we need a little time to brew those changes in the work groups. And I know we have some regulatory program management staff. I know Katie Bryce has been looking at some of the Sanitarians rules, some of the other programs rules, to kind of come up with some organizational and wording changes just to kind of improve the product. So we're going to have our folks kind of looking at this internally in addition to getting getting input from our board. So I think we can have those recommendations in workable shape by the end of the year, and then just keep the process going. I don't see a need personally for a meeting in 3 months, but I think end of the year probably works best for us.
All right, thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
All right, anything else anybody is dying to talk about before we adjourn? Good. This meeting is adjourned.